All right, get this show on the road. Got to do some housekeeping here real quick because I'm going to use Hyper-V tonight. So using the Hyper-V manager, all right, we'll go into the server. I'm going to go into Hyper-V settings, and I'm going to change the default location where it keeps the virtual hard drives. So I'm going to do that first. Apparently, I forgot where I put it. Oh, it's Tim. Not. All right, fine. Do that. And then we change where we store the virtual machines. Copy that path. Put that right in there. And Numos painting's fine. Not worried about storage migrations. Enhanced session policy mode. So we're going to leave this checked. And there's a reason why I'm leaving this checked. And one of the advantages I think it has over actual like VirtualBox. The rest of this we don't really need to worry about. So save that. Okay. Now I need to create a virtual hard drive. And you can build a virtual machine and the virtual hard drive all at once. I'm in the habit of doing this just because you might need to create a fixed disk, like a virtual hard drive of an actual set size. And you can't do that when you're making a virtual machine on its own. So I come into the new virtual hard drive wizard, go ahead, click next, get past the first stage. The format, probably always going to be VHDX because this is the newer format. VHD is for like a legacy virtual machine, and you've got to be running like right around Windows 2000 or so. So you're probably not going to do that. VHD set, again, there's going to be some rare instances where you use this, but it's not going to be very often, and it's not for just a general purpose kind of virtual hard drive. So we're going to leave it with VHDX. Okay, so here, when I was talking about fixed size, so if we go with fixed size, right, Hyper-V will create the file, and then it will write all zeros in the file to actually have it take up the amount of space that we assign to it. So if we did a 100 gig hard drive, it would go through and write zeros everywhere so that the actual file size on the disk would be 100 gigs. Dynamically expanding only takes up the space as we add to it up to a maximum. All right. So we're going to leave it dynamically expanding. Differencing is a whole other beast, and we're not getting into that right now. So we need to give it a name. This is going to be our first domain controller in the forest. So call it Republic, DC01. And then I use .os so that I know it's an operating system disk. And then confirm the location, which is where I want it to be. Click next. I'm going to leave it 127 gig. Typically, I'll put 250 gig in here, but depending on how much disk space you have, and well, we're not going to fill it, but in production, 250 gigs is going to be right about where you want an OS disk because you're going to allow for some file creep. You're going to allow that to expand over time as updates are in and Microsoft doesn't clean those up and other things go on. Because you don't want to run the OS disk out of space. It's kind of a mild pain to actually expand back out. It used to be you couldn't expand it at all. So then you were really hosed. So yeah, we'll do that. It's fine. Next. Just go over the options. VHD, dynamically expanding, give it the name. So here the name, and we got the name of the server, we got .os to specify that this is where Windows is going to live, our installation of Windows Server. And then of course the file extension, VHDX, the location, all the good things. So we're just going to click finish. Then we're going to come back. Then we're going to create a virtual machine. And this is going to be Republic, DC01, 12. Now let's use the regular naming convention. .republic. And we're going to put the domain name in here that we're going to use, which is .republic.example.org. Confirm where we're storing the virtual machine, which is where we want it. We're not going to change that. Generation. Here you're pretty much always going to do generation 2 unless you're dealing with a 32-bit OS. Then you need to go with a Gen 1. So you're almost always going to do Gen 2. Memory. Okay, so this is a startup memory. So when the machine starts, Hyper-V allocates all of the RAM you assign to it. So we're going to make that 8 gig. We're going to use dynamic memory. We're going to go in and change this a little bit once it's made. But dynamic memory will vary the amount of RAM that it assigns to the VM based on the load and how much the virtual machine is requesting. So if it's idle and just kind of sitting there, depending on what the settings are for dynamic memory, you may see this as low as half a gig. So next, connected. We're going to leave that at the default switch for now. All right. So here, where once you connect to a virtual hard disk, where it says create a virtual disk, this will automatically create a dynamically expanding disk if you leave all of this here. So if you have a use case where you need a set size for the file, you can't just create it here. You have to create it beforehand and then attach it in this step, or just make the VM and then create the virtual hard drive and attach it later as the final option here. So we already have one built. So I'm going to use an existing hard drive. Go to browse. I only have the one, so it's easy for now. Next, again, look over your options just to make sure that you have everything that you want. You could have, maybe typed something in wrong, clicked it wrong. I do it all the time. Finish. Okay, so then we right click on the virtual machine, go into settings, and I'm going to go into the RAM. So here in the dynamic memory, the minimum amount that it will assign is half a gig. Go ahead and bump that up to a full gig. We're going to max it at 16 gig. Give it 2 virtual processors. The other settings I'm not really going to go into depth with right at the moment. This is more just to spin up, get things going. Going to the SCSI controller, we need to add a DVD drive so we can actually install Microsoft Server. That's kind of helpful, right? Let's see, temp, ISOs. And the first one is going to be Server 2012. Just so I have something to migrate from. But the steps for creating a forest and a domain are the same in Server 2012, Server 2016, Server 2019, Server 2022. So it doesn't really matter there. And then we come back up to firmware. Oh no, I haven't applied it yet. My bad. All right, let's click apply. Come back. Going to go ahead and bump the DVD drive up to the first boot device. And so what would happen here if I didn't do that is it'll try to go to the hard drive. There's nothing there. Then it'll try to do a Pixie boot, and then it will wait for a response. So basically, you get to stare at a black screen for a while before it finally decides to go to the DVD. I'm just skipping all that. Just gonna make my life a little easier. Going to come in integration services. We're going to untick time synchronization so that it does not look at the host for the time. Going to come into checkpoints. I don't want to use checkpoints at all. So we're not going to have it do automatic checkpoints. We can enable checkpoints and we can leave these settings. They're not going to do anything. If you use automatic checkpoints, then obviously it will create one every time you spin like the machine up, and you wind up with a whole daisy chain of them. I don't want that. I don't need that for this. Smart paging files, nothing to change there. Automatic start action. What do you want to do with this virtual machine when the physical computer starts? Well, in this case, we don't want to do anything. But if this were a production system, obviously you want the domain controller to start. In the event of like a power outage, and then when the server comes back up, you want to start your domain controller. So you would click always start, and you can put a delay in here. Usually you put like a 30-second delay to let the host get fully spun up. In this case, we're going to do nothing. Automatic stop action. Okay, so here, when the host gracefully shuts down, right? This is what it does to the virtual machine. It can either save the machine state, right? Or it will just straight turn off the virtual machine, which is the equivalent of walking up to yank the power cord. Don't really want to do that. So I'm going to go with shut down the guest operating system. This gives the VM a chance to gracefully shut down before the host does. This would be preferred in a production environment because Windows gets really cranky when you just do things like turn it off. If it doesn't have a chance to write all the things in the registry and do all of its maintenance before it shuts down for a graceful shutdown. Right? So we've got all that. I'm going to click OK. And we're going to connect to it. And if you've used VirtualBox, pretty sure you've seen some glaring differences between the way Hyper-V wants to run and the way VirtualBox does. Hyper-V feels a little bit smoother, maybe that I'm more familiar with it as opposed to VirtualBox. I don't know, maybe biased. It's entirely possible. All right, so now we'll go ahead and click start. And we didn't catch it in time, which is why it's doing the pixie booting here. This is a minor annoyance. Sometimes you just got to kind of play with it a little bit so you can catch it, because this is like the downside of using the enhanced session. So we go up under view, we got enhanced session. We don't really have it right now, but when you start it, it does. And you notice how it wanted to change the window size, the resolution for the VM. That's what part of what the enhanced session does. And so that's why it does this kind of wonky thing. You got to like click in it because it'll lose focus. And so it's a little bit of a thing to get it started. But overall, once you get used to it, it's just another thing. And for the installation, I'm going to go with a GUI. I'm going to go with standard. Standard data center for a lab isn't going to really make a whole lot of difference because you're not going to be activating these machines necessarily. But in production, you'll have a key. You'll activate it based, your installation will be based on the key that you bought. So if you bought standard, you'll install standard. If you bought data center, you'll install data center. But we're going to go with the GUI for now. Later, I will go with a core installation. But not right now. Right now, I just want to get a domain controller spun up. I want to do some basic stuff and get into some of the other things. License agreement. I will always choose custom install. Fortunately, here we don't have a whole lot of choices. We just take drive 0. We wait. quick little diagram here of what we're looking at. With nope. Fit window. There we go. So here's the domain we're looking at building, which is kind of in a weird spot. So we're going to build republic.example.org. And we can add other domains into this forest with the different domain trees. Not going to get that far into it necessarily. Because you don't really want all of the different domains. You'll want more sites, but there is an instance here where we may go, say, into like create a domain for Navy and then create another domain for, say, one of the capital ships. But that, again, that's a slightly later in the game type deal. Not relevant to what we're really doing right at the moment. That's centered-ish. Yeah, it's fine. Fortunately, this installation goes a lot faster than it does in Hyper-V than it does in VirtualBox. Yay. And while we're doing that, let's go ahead and create another couple of virtual hard drives here. We'll leave that at VHDX, dynamic expanding, yes. And let's go with DCO2.os. I'm going to leave it at 127 gig. Go ahead and click finish. All right, so we're already installed here for 2012, which is fantastic. If we look, let me change. Let's move this over here. You see the assigned RAM is now at a gig, which is our minimum. We may have caught where it fluctuated a little bit there for a second. It was at like almost 1.5 gig. So right now that's rebooting. We get the full 8 gig assigned to it. Need to put in a password. And this is for the local administrator account. Here, we're ready to go ahead and sign in. We're connected to a network. All right, so here, when Windows 10, Windows 11, Microsoft Server, any flavor of Microsoft Server, when it asks, do you want to find PCs and devices connected to this network? If you click no here, it will set the connection to a private network. If you click yes, or no, let me clarify that. If you click no, it sets it to a public network. Whereas if you click yes, it sets it to a private network. Right here. This it's important when it comes to Windows Firewall. Because Windows Firewall has a profile for public networks, one for private, and then when if it's joined to a domain, it also has one for domain, and which connection it detects can affect necessarily what it allows through the firewall. So like if you had a server on a public network, you would not necessarily want it to respond to ping requests. So you can disable that in the profile for public, but enable it in private so that if you're at your workstation, somebody says, hey, I can't get to a server, you can at least test to see if you can ping it, right? So if you click no there the first time and it's on a public network, you can run into some kind of weird behavior where you're like, hey, I suddenly can't ping it, or, whatever. It's one of the things you're going to want to check in your troubleshooting. Get that window. It's there. What's being weird? Did I not click what I thought I did? Yeah. Allow enhanced session mode. Interesting. It's better. Probably get away with something else here. $1520 by 1080. Yeah, we got the display, or we got the room for that, right? So now that we're here, got a local server. We want to see the IP address though, before I go making any other changes. An IP config. This is natted. Which is fine for now. Yeah, we'll come back to that. All right, so now that we have our install, first thing is update time zone for where we need it. We're in Central, we're not in Pacific. Okay, go ahead and make sure that it's, automatically adjust clock for daylight savings time. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. For some reason, untick, notify me when the clock changes. Here, change this to the actual proper time. I think part of that weirdness is because it's currently running NAT, so it doesn't necessarily see that it's connected. May come back and change that later. We also want to rename the machine. So if we click on it, if we click on computer name, right? Open the window, we can click on change. We can change the computer name here, and we can also change it in PowerShell. So we have to, pretty sure we have to run it as administrator. Let's test that theory. Should require elevated permissions. So if we run the super secret rename computer PowerShell command, tell it what the new name is, which is Republic DC01, and we tell it to restart. Close this, because as soon as I do this, if all goes according to plan, then it should just restart the VM, right? There you go. We don't need to be in elevated. If we did, Microsoft would have complained and said, you need to be in an elevated command prompt or an elevated session. There we go. There's our enhanced. So if we look here, Let me connect to this first. From here now, we have our enhanced session options, which is fantastic. See, with enhanced session, we can do cool stuff like just resize the window and it will readjust. It'll adjust the resolution of the virtual machine. Now we've got that. We've created it. Need to tell it about our updates because we do want it updated, even if it is a lab machine, right? So we'll download the updates, but we won't automatically install them. About that later. So now we need to add Active Directory domain. Close enough. Okay, so we'll in the server manager, click on manage, add roles and features, which runs the add roles and features wizard. Go ahead and click next. Role-based or feature-based installation. We're not doing this remotely, so remote desktop services installation isn't it really something that we need. Go ahead and click next. We only have the one server, so that's neat. Okay, so here, the role we want is Active Directory Domain Services. All right, Active Directory Domain Services stores information about objects on the network and makes the network information available to users and network administrators. It uses domain controllers to give network users access to permitted resources anywhere on the network through a single login process. So Active Directory just gives us basically a hierarchical way of organizing network objects, primarily users and containers, right? And then we can assign attributes to those that says, you know, Bob has permissions to this folder or this network share. This computer can access this share if you know, all the deals. So when we go ahead and go to tick the box, it tells us we have to go ahead and add some other features like remote server administration tools, the Active Directory domain services, and Active Directory lightweight domain service tools, the Active Directory module for PowerShell, other ADS tools like the Active Directory Administrative Center and the Active Directory Domain Services Snap-in and Command Line tools. Go ahead and leave the box Include Management Tools checked. If you go to install a rule, you always want to include the management tools. So there really shouldn't be any reason this is not checked. We'll go ahead and click Add Features. Next, and then it takes us to features, which brings us to the question of what a difference between a role and a feature is, right? So a role is essentially the primary job that the server is going to provide to the network. Features are additional applications and services that help it provide that service, right? So in Active Directory is the primary service that domain service is what we're going to primarily offer here. But the tools help us provide that along. A better example would be, say, DHCP server, right? DHCP server is a role, so it can be a primary service. However, it's not it either. Mm. Yeah. Okay. So we're like Active Directory domain services would be the role, the primary job, right? But failover clustering feature, the failover clustering feature here would improve the functionality of that by allowing the server to join a cluster for high availability. We're not going to worry about failover clustering right yet, so we're not going to add any features. Just next. I'm not going to tell it to restart automatically. It doesn't need to. So when we click install, progress bar, tell us where we're at, where we've started, and we'll watch it just do its thing. Then all that's doing that. Quickly spin up another virtual machine. BCO2. Org. Storage is fine. Gen 2. 8 gigs worth of RAM to start with. Connect the default switch to it. Put our hard drive in here. Okay, configuration required. Installation succeeded. But now, if you notice, the yellow triangle with the exclamation mark tells us that something needs our attention. And this is the post-deployment configuration for ADDS. And we have to promote. It wants us to promote every server we install ADDS on to a domain controller. In this case, we have to because we have no other domain controllers. So we're going to go ahead and promote it. Now, Active Directory uses a forest and then domain tree structure. So every domain within the forest, hence trees, forest, the whole thing. We don't currently have a forest because we have no domains. So adding a domain controller to an existing domain in which we don't have. We can add a new domain to an existing forest. Well, we don't have a forest either. So we need to add a new forest. And by default, the forest name is going to be the name of the first domain within the forest. In this case, Republic example.org. And the reason that we're using republic.example.org is primarily for DNS. So when you first go to register a domain, more than likely you're going to register an internet domain, right? A top level domain of, say, like example.org or example.com, which is fine. But when you create an Active Directory domain, right, you're going to have internal domain name services. Just a second. But so Active Directory needs DNS to resolve names within the network. So if you have example.com registered for your internet domain, you have a website out there at example.com, and you name your domain example.com, now you run into kind of a DNS split brain deal, because it doesn't know if you're trying to access example.com on the internet externally or internally at that point. It's just like, oh, well, I need a machine name, and it goes to look it up, and it can create confusion. So to avoid that, you name your internal domain name with a child of the parent domain that you have, right? So in this case, example.org, we're going to name the domain republic.example.org because it'll be a child of example.org. And that will avoid the split brain issue in DNS. That's why we have the three. We could do something else, but we want to follow normal conventions here, or recommended conventions. So we've got the name. We'll go ahead and click next. Wait. Okay, see. Why not? So when it's finally ready, we get prompted to choose a functional domain level, or a functional level of the forest and the domain. We don't need to change these because we're already running server 2012 R2. We don't have any existing domain controllers that would be, say, 2008. If we did this, these would show server 2008, 2008 R2, or server 2012. So since the domain controller is going to match the functional level, we're good here. We don't need to make any changes. If we, for some reason, had, say, a 2008 server, then this would be 2008, because your functional levels should only be as high as the earliest version of your domain controllers. So if you had, a 2008, 2012, 2016, then your functional levels would be at 2008 until you retire to 2008 server. Then you can move to 2012. And then once you retire to 2012, you could move it to 2016. So we don't need to make any changes here. We're going to leave that. Specify the compatibilities. Here, DNS is already selected because this is required by Active Directory. Global catalog. Since we don't have any domain controllers, we need a global catalog because that stores pretty much all of the Active Directory database information. We've got to have that somewhere. Obviously, we can't have it as read only because we need to make changes to it because we only have the one domain controller. Go ahead and pick a password for the directory service restore mode. In production, this should be stored with all of the important passwords and credentials somewhere off, either in a vault or whatever. So in the event that you need them, you have the password and it's well documented. It's kept in a safe, secure location. Once we click next, we're prompted, or we're told that a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. This is fine. We don't really want this because we don't want anything from outside to be able to resolve machine names internally, right? We don't want someone who's trying to go to, say, example.org to be able to get to the server if they just typed in Republic, or if they typed in if they managed to get the IP address of the domain controller and then we're able to resolve the name of an internal machine. So we really don't want this in this instance. Again, if we had, say, a web server that we wanted people to be able to resolve, then we would need to make some changes to DNS, but we will address that type of deal when we talk specifically about DNS later. So we're going to go ahead and click next. Let it do its thing. And then it will fill in the NetBIOS name for us. In this case, it's just going to be Republic. Click next. All right. So now it's asking us where we want to keep the Active Directory domain services database, the log files, the sysvol. You really shouldn't have any reason to change any of this. The default should be fine. I know of no instances where I've ever renamed the sysvol folder to something different or kept it somewhere different. Just Windows sysvol. So go ahead, click next. Look over the selections. All right, so we're, it's a server as the first Active Directory domain controller in a new force. Bonus. The new domain name is republic.example.org. That's what we want. The NetBIOS name is Republic. Okay, force. And domain functional levels are good. Global catalog, yes. DNS server, yes. Create DNS delegation, no. Then the location of the log file, the database folder, the sysvol folder. DNS service will be configured on this computer. The computer will be configured to use DNS server as its preferred DNS server. So it's going to use itself as its primary DNS. So if it needs to look up like resolve Microsoft.com to an IP address, it's going to ask itself first. And then it's going to, I don't know. So then it's going to forward it off to its forwarders and everything else is what this line's saying. It's like, well, I'm going to look at me first. And then I'll worry about passing it up the chain. Password for the new domain administrator will be the same as the password to the local administrator on the computer. So when you promote a Microsoft server to a domain controller, it will no longer have a local administrator account. You will have to log in using a domain account, and Microsoft's going to go ahead and say, okay, well, there's already an administrator account built into Active Directory domain. So we're just going to change that password to what you currently have the local administrator password for. And we're just going to ditch your local administrator altogether. Prereq checks. Wait. Wait some more. Okay. So all the prereqs passed successfully. But we have some warnings here. The first one is you're going to get this every time about the default security setting and the cryptography algorithms. This is essentially requiring stronger encryption for your remote desktop sessions. Nothing we really need to worry about here. And odds are this has already been addressed to be more secure in existing domains. The next one, this computer has at least one physical network adapter that does not have static IP addresses assigned to its IP properties. Okay. If both IPv4 and IPv6 are enabled for a network adapter, both IPv4 and IPv6 static IP addresses should be assigned. Such static IP address assignments. Okay, so it's unhappy about this because we don't have a static IP address assigned to the machine. And we're also making it a domain name service server. So if we were to tell all of our machines, hey, use, the IP address 10.10.10.10 as your primary DNS server, that would be fine, except for if for some reason the DHCP lease expired on the server and it got a new IP address, say now it's 10.10.10.11, then everybody that's using 10.10.10.10 for DNS resolution, they're not going to be able to find the server because it's now at .11, not 10. So this is saying, hey, you really should make this a static IP address, and we'll do that. And then we have a warning about the delegation for the DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent. We've already addressed that. We don't want anybody on the outside necessarily just be able to resolve internal machine names. So we're okay with that. That just gives us that extra layer where they, some machine outside can't just suddenly resolve to, accounting workstation 5. And then the prereq section and all the prereqs are complete. Now at this point, we could go in and create a static IP address, then come back and go through all the install stuff. But I'm just going to install it, and I'll give it a static IP address once we reboot. Right now, this is the only machine we have on the network, so it doesn't matter. It's going to look to itself for DNS anyway. We really don't need DNS. DNS isn't that important for us right at the moment, so it's okay. We can wait. Wait. So this is where it's going to install the group policy management console, which we'll talk about a little further down the road. Interesting. Okay, so now it's done. It's going to restart. change our settings on our future domain controller. This guy. Use server 2022. Don't worry about the switch right at the moment. Uncheck time synchronization. I do this for every VM that's on a Hyper-V server, just so that they don't look to the host for the time. Uncheck, use automatic checkpoints. This really only applies in Windows 10. In Windows 11, I think, Microsoft. So there was a point in time where this was never actually checked. You could go in and manually check it, but it was unchecked by default. Then Microsoft decided, hey, we should have them use automatic checkpoints. But then by Windows 11, they've said, you know what? Maybe not the best idea. I agree with them. Kind of wish they'd go in and update that in Windows 10, but that's neither here nor there. All right, so automatic start action, we're going to set to nothing. And then we're going to shut down the guest operating system when the host shuts down. Go ahead and save our changes to that. And now that this is up, we'll go ahead and log into our domain controller. Size this window. Okay. So in Server Manager, obviously you load into the dashboard. There's some other stuff here that kind of tells you the overall health. And if there's been like anything in the event viewer that is triggered off, like errors or whatnot, so you can expand this out. There are times where you'll see like errors in here for services that didn't start or shut down. That were shut down, they're not running. Most of the time, you don't care. But if you see red and that really kind of bothers you, you can go in and you can hide them. But fortunately, this is all green at the moment, so we're good. I don't need to go into that a whole lot. You can add other servers into Server Manager, which we'll do here shortly when we spin up the workstation that we're going to use to manage these things, so we're not in the server all the time. Right now, though, since we have the server, we're going to finish that here. We need to assign a static IP address. Yeah. So in Server Manager, I'm going to click on the IPv4 address. That takes us to the network connections. Obviously, if we go to properties, go to IPv4, tell it to use the following address. Now, I don't know the DHCP scope off the top of my head, so we're going to cheat. I'm going to look up the current config so that we know the subnet mask, the gateway. This is a 240-bit subnet, so, or what, /20? 255, 240.0. Pretty sure that's a /20. Could be wrong, but it might be close. You know what? Let's just look it up. Basically. Subnet calculator. So 172, so that's class B. 172.16. So we're at 172.25.192.1. Actually, no. Let's use 25.207.199. 25.207.199. 7.199. Send out mask. There. Yep. 20-bit subnet. Okay, that carries us. So we've got an IP address at the high end. But because of /20, we should be able to use anything else in that range. We should be able to use 127.16.25.2. 25.192. My bad. Let's just make this a little easier to work with here. Obviously, my short-term memory is just horrible. So 172.25.192.2, 255, 255, 240, 25, 192.1. Okay, so here the preferred DNS server at the moment is itself. 127.0.0.1 is the loopback IP address. We could put the IP address that we're going to statically IP it. And then we can put Google just for giggles. Now we can also do all of this from PowerShell, right? So we can use the command get net adapter. Really? Did I just totally? No, that's right. What wrong with you here? Net adapter. Did I fat finger it? Yep. I just didn't type it right. Yeah, I missed an A right there. My bad. Okay, so interface index. We got the MAC address. We got the interface index. The name. Okay. So we can, once we have this, we can come in and do net or new, actually. Net IP address. And then this takes the interface index number, which is 12. Add in the IP address that we want to assign, right? So 172.25.192.2. Then the prefix length, which is 20. The default gateway, just 172.5.192.1. And if we hit enter, and I don't mess up typing defaults, then where's all of this? Okay, it spit out all of this, which is good, which tells us that it actually ran the command successfully. All right, so now if we go back and look at our properties, ta-da! But we need to update the DNS settings. We don't need to at this point, but we should. And it's always nice to do it. Always nice to know it so we can come back and deal with it later, right? So we need to set the DNS and server address. Yeah. For interface index, 12 to use server address. And we're going to enter multiple. So because we have primary and an alternate. We can do that using a PowerShell array. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to tell it to use its own IP address first. Then as a fallback to use Google. Now in production, you're probably never going to use Google as an alternate DNS server in this in this fashion, right? You're not going to tell the workstations to go out and use Google necessarily. Because if you do, and you try to resolve an internal host name, well, the first place it's going to look is Google. Google's not going to know that. It's not authoritative for the internal domain that we have. So that's why you typically want to avoid that. In a lab, yeah, it works. In production, yeah, you really don't want to do that. You want to send it off to, say, the firewall or the ISP's DNS, which you will do in the actual DNS settings, not here. So you'll do it at the DNS server settings level, not the actual server interface level. So cancel that. Open all this up again. Dun, dun, dun. And there you go. We don't need to save any of that. We can close this window. Exit PowerShell. Or not. Okay. Interesting enough. Actually, I did close the window a little early, though. I do want to confirm that we can resolve. And we can. We also lost our little notification here that basically said, hey, I don't have an internet connection. That's nice. So the question becomes now, what are we using for DNS resolution? Because we have Google. So can we resolve using ourself, who's also forwarding along, right? If we go into tools, open up the DNS server settings, the DNS manager. We look at our server. Right click, we'll go to properties. Okay, so first off, the interfaces. These are the IP interfaces that are going to serve DNS requests. Now, internally, you're usually going to be using IPv4. You're not going to be listening on IPv6 so much because you're not going to, your machines internally are not necessarily going to be using IPv6. They might, but I really kind of doubt it. Now, in the broader scope, like the internet and stuff like that, and through your ISP and everything, they're going to probably be using IPv6. You internally are not, because you have to remember all of the metrics for this and everything else. And everybody's familiar with IPv4. IPv4 accommodates millions of devices. So everybody's more familiar with it. So it's just easier to manage. So rather than let it listen on both, we're just going to listen on the IPv4 interface. And if you have multiple network cards on your domain controller that are enabled, maybe servicing other IP subnets, you may not be listening for DNS on those. You may want them all to come through this, through a particular IP address. So you would come in here and untick all of the ones except for the one you really want to be listening for DNS requests on. So your forwarders, this is where you would put in, say, your firewall or an external DNS of some sort. You're going to leave root hints. There's no need to not use root hints. All of this, we're talking more about DNS in depth later down the road. This is just to kind of let you know, like when you use Google, if you're going to use Google, this is where you would put in, say, 8.8.8, right? And then you would point all of your internal machines to the IP address of this particular domain controller. And then, yeah, you're going to tell the server, okay, if you don't know, forward it on to the next one to hop. So like the ISPs, DNS servers, you would put here, you know, or Google. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to leave it the way that it is. But that brings to the point where it couldn't actually resolve the gateway as DNS because that's what it has in there. So if we go into the DNS lookup tool, which is the namespace lookup. Now, if you just want to know, like, if you just want to do some DNS resolution on, say, you know, Microsoft.com, you can just do ns lookup Microsoft.com, hit enter, wait, and you see where we're getting, you know, we get some timeouts and then we finally get a range of IP addresses. So these are all the IP addresses that Microsoft.com will answer to. And the timeouts here kind of give us a hint. And I suspect that our DNS lookup on 172.25.192.2, which is this server, it's not actually working. So then it's falling over to the Google IP address. So if we come back and we just do NS lookup, right? It tells us right now that we're using our self, which is fine. Actually, let's apply that because we did uncheck. You see that we got an IPv6 address returned back for itself. Right? So we'll exit this now that we actually have that. Clear the workspace. Do NS lookup again. We still get the IPv6 address. That's fine. And then if we just type in what we want to resolve, like Microsoft.com, it's looking at itself, it's timing out, and then it finally gets an answer. So if we type server, then 8.8.8, this changes. This tells it, okay, this is the server that we, you know, the DNS server that we want to use. And if you have more than one, and you're not really sure, you can come in and type server and specify the IP address of the DNS server you want to use. This helps you troubleshoot within the network if you have devices that are having problems and you're like, okay, why, you know, it's just another way to kind of figure out where the workstation is trying to go for DNS requests, why it can't resolve them if you have problems internally. Maybe server's turned off, maybe the DNS service isn't running on a particular server. So you can switch between and say, okay, is server A actually doing its resolving? Is server B doing the resolving? You could have bad forwarders on one and it's just not resolving. And then so if you have two and you say you have forwarders that on server A that aren't configured quite right, so everybody's been using server B, everything's been fine, and then something goes wrong with server B, now all of a sudden nothing works for DNS resolution. And you're kind of like, well, okay, we have the other, you know, you've confirmed the server's running, the other DNS server A is running for DNS, right? But then when you come in on a workstation level and you switch it to that server and then you go to look up, say, Microsoft.com, and it doesn't resolve, you're like, okay, so now we know where the problem is. We can go look at, you know, now we need to start investigating DNS on server A to see why it's not working the way that we expect it to. Because you see right here, when we set the server to Google, we immediately get a range of IP addresses from Microsoft.com. Right? So if we go back and we change this to 172.5.2, so if we change it back to itself, oops, then look up, we get an answer right back too. So the only thing here is the forwarder is wrong. for because this is the gateway. We're not going to expect DNS to necessarily be running on the gateway, but I'm also not going to change it right now. Just throwing some other stuff out there. Let's clear that. We'll leave PowerShell open for the moment. Go ahead and close the DNS manager. Okay, so we have a domain controller. Now we need to manage Active Directory, right? We have a couple of tools to do this. We have the Active Directory Administrative Center. And we also have Active Directory users and computers. I think we might need some more screen space here. Rearrange some windows. So, all right. Yeah, that's close enough. So, the Active Directory Administrative Center I don't use very much at all. The main reason I come in here is to enable the Active Directory recycle bin. All right. So what the Active Directory recycle bin does is allows us to store deleted Active Directory objects for a default of 180 days. We can change that setting if we want, but it will keep them by default for 180 days. We can go in to the deleted objects and restore those without having to go through the full-blown directory service recovery manager, right? Or the restore mode, the Active Directory restore mode. Because if you go into Active Directory restore mode, you have to go into, you have to safe boot the server. You have to load it in the safe mode, and then go through that. And you have to put the AD, the password in, and you have to do this whole authoritative restore type deal and everything else. A whole big hassle. And depending on how many domain controllers you have, you wind up bringing the network down for a while whilst you're going through this restore process. So if you accidentally deleted, say, a user, now you got this whole rigmarole, or you can just wind up recreating them again. But that could lead to its own problems. So a better way to do that is to come in here and enable the recycle bin. Right? So the Active Directory Administrative Center, this window is broken down into, the breadcrumb pane up here at the top. So it tells us where we're at. All right, we have the navigation pane on the left. And we have the last view pane here in the center. And we have the task pane over here. And we also have the PowerShell history. Now this, if you click on it, you'll expand it out and it will show you the commands that are run. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of expand that out a little bit. But one of the very first things that I do when I do a live migration, or whenever we're doing Active Directory things, right? So when we take on a new client or do any of those sorts of things, I go into their Active Directory and I make sure that the recycle bin is enabled, because more than likely what's going to happen is they're going to call up and they're going to be like, I just deleted like 50 users. But they're going to call in a panic, right? They're like, oh my God, I just deleted 50 users out of my Active Directory. What am I going to do? And you can tell them, hey, well, we can recreate them all again. Or if the recycle bin is enabled, you just be like, oh, okay, cool. Hold on. Give me a second. And then just restore them. And then you are the coolest server administrator on the planet, because you've just fixed the problem in about 5 minutes that really could have been a lot more painful. So you definitely want to come in here, you want to enable it. You have multiple ways to do it. You can come over here in the task pane and you can just go enable recycle bin, right? We don't have that here. We have to go in and look at the domain. You enable it here. We can also right click in the navigation, enable a recycle bin, and also right click in the last view pane and enable a recycle bin. No matter which one we really do here. Okay, Windows is going to ask us if we're sure we want to do this, because once we've enabled it, we cannot disable it, which I'm really okay with. I'm kind of glad that Microsoft doesn't let you disable it once you've enabled the recycle bin, because somebody comes in here, they do an errant click, all of a sudden they disable the recycle bin. Somebody does something like delete 100 user accounts. Now you have no quick way to restore them. So if you're working under the assumption and somebody had already disabled it and you're like, it's fine, and then you find out it's not, no, you don't want to do that. So we're okay here. We're going to go ahead and click OK. And then we're basically done, right? That's all we've done. It's the next window comes up, says, hey, you've got to refresh the administrative center because we've begun enabling the recycle bin for the forest. However, it's not going to function properly until all the domain controllers in the forest have replicated the recycle bin configuration change. Well, we only have the one, so it shouldn't take that long. So we should be done. We're going to test that. So we're going to create an OU, and we have multiple ways to do that as well. Again, you can come over here into the task pane, although we can't create an OU from here. Interesting. We're on the domain. All right, so if we right click over here in the navigation, we could create a new organizational unit. Here we cannot. Kind of nifty. Not really. But okay, so we go new organizational unit. We can also right click in the last view pane, and we should also have, and we have create new organizational unit. Okay, so in the administrative center of the window is a little different than if we were to do this through Active Directory users and computers, right? And again, remember, Active Directory really only concerns itself with two types of objects. Well, So you either have, say, a object or a container, right? And if you look at the icons here, you see some that have like a little folder inside the folder, some that don't. So if you look, like computers, this is a container. Domain controller is an organizational unit, but an organizational unit is a container, default container for domain controllers, right? We cannot create a container other than an organizational unit, because there's no option to go in here and say create a container, although an organizational unit is a container. So it's a little bit of a misnomer, but pretty much, well, not pretty much. Once you have Active Directory installed and you're doing management, you're going in here and you're going to be, and like we're going to do here in a little bit, we're going to start adding, organizational units, containers to help organize and keep things where we want them. You just get used to the idea that if you need a new container, it's going to be an organization. You're not going to create a regular container, right? But you see, when we go to create a new one through the two separate tools, given more options in the administrative center than we are in Active Directory users and computers. And really, the slimmed down version over here in Active Directory users and computers is actually better for the most part. Depending on what you're doing, how much information you're actually going to be adding. So, we can come over here and we can say, okay, this is going to be demo. And let's name it demo admin center, right? This is a demo OU we created from the admin center. We can give it a street, city, state, province, description. Usually you're not worrying about this so much when it comes to an actual organizational unit. A description maybe, because it is useful, right? So like right here where we have descriptions. But again, it really kind of depends on what you want to put here. I do uncheck protect from accidental deletion, especially in this case because we are going to delete it. So we don't want the hassle of having to go in and uncheck this. We're just going to uncheck it now. And then over here, if we create a demo users and computers, so we click OK. And if we look at our PowerShell history, we see where we enabled the recycle bin. Enable AD option feature. We didn't ask for the confirm. But the identity here is the GUI ID. We would have had to go find that if we went to type this into PowerShell. So going through the GUI for this is actually probably faster to enable the recycle bin than using PowerShell. The next here is the new AD unit that we created. So demo admin center, right? Then we have the path, which is, it's hanging off the root of the domain. So we're just using the domain here. The DC equals Republic. So if you look at this and you say, okay, you've got domain controller equals Republic, domain controller equals example, domain controller equals org. This is actually the LDAP standard. You have to break out the domain into its individual pieces. You could not just go DC equals republic.example.org. You have to break it every stage out this way. And that's because Active Directory is based on the LDAP specification. Okay, so then we also have protected from accidental deletion, false, because we unchecked that. That's good. And then the server, which is the server that we're on. If you were to type this in actual PowerShell, right? So if we come into PowerShell and we say, okay, well, we just want to create a new organizational unit. So we go new AD organizational unit. We say we're going to name this demo PowerShell. Then we're going to give it path. And we're going to put this one off the root as well. So we're just going to go DC equals public, DC equals example. And the DC is not case sensitive. You can use lowercase, you can use capitals. It really kind of depends on how it stands out to you. Right? You may prefer capitals before the equal sign, you may not. Then we also need the protected, no space there, from accidental deletion. And that's going to be false. We do not have to put the server name because we're doing it on this server. We're running the command from here, so we can skip the server switch. Hit enter, and I fat fingered organizational unit because why not? And is organizational unit, right? Yeah, there we go. All right. So now come in here and click the refresh button. We have demo admin center, demo PowerShell. I've not created this one yet. So let's go ahead and do that. Click OK. We'll refresh both sides here. Now we have admin power center, PowerShell, users and computers. And we have admin center, PowerShell, and users and computers. Have all three. Beautiful thing. And so now we can delete all three. So if we come into the admin center, we can click delete. Are you sure you want to delete? Yeah, I'm sure. I want to delete that. Okay. Come over here. If we delete the one we created here. So if we right click on the one that we want, delete. Okay, sure. Yeah, do that. All right. And just for giggles, we can come over here and remove Now, if you look, it shows us remove AD object. I'm pretty sure we can still remove an Active Directory organizational unit. Yeah. PowerShell. Okay, so we can't use name. Have to use the identity switch. T. Right. So here, we still have to use the LDAP convention, right? But we have to tell it that's an OU and the name of the OU, and then DC, so on and so forth. So we go OU equals, and it's demo. Dash in there for some reason. Oh, no, I know what I'm doing. PowerShell, DC equals public, DC sample, C equals org. And again, we should be able to skip this, the server specification. Yep. Are you sure you want to perform this action? Yes, I want to delete it. There you go. No errors. Beautiful thing. Clear that up. All right. So now, command, we refresh. Refresh. Now we have none of the OUs that we created. We do have a deleted objects container in the administrative center. Double click that. Ta-da! There they all are. They're all in a recycle bin. So we don't have the deleted objects and Active Directory users and computers. And this is one other thing to keep in mind when you want to see what's actually in the Active Directory recycle bin. You have to come into the administrative center unless you run some PowerShell commands to actually to go through and figure out what's sitting in there and restore them that way. Can do it. For some reason, I can't get the mouse to do the thing, and it's effect. There we go. Good. Was offending my OC a little. Okay, so we deleted them. All of a sudden, you're like, "Oh, I didn't want to delete that." No. So we can come back in. We've got it selected. We can just restore it. You can right-click and restore. And now when we go back in, hey, look, they're back. Yay! Life is good. Everybody's saved. Of course, now you're usually going to have other things inside the OU. So when you delete them and restore them, you may have to go in and restore other objects as well underneath it. Just keep that in mind. So there's the difference between the two there. I'm going to go ahead and redelete them because we're not going to use them. Just get rid of them altogether. So, but we do need to create some sort of organizational structure here, right? Because we have a computers container, we have a users container. Okay, this is kind of okay, but you know, we have other things to organize, other ways that we want to organize this, right? Because in the Republic, right, we had, so in episode 1, if we go through and we look, we had the Jedi, right? That's a group kind of thing. So we could say, okay, all of the Jedi users, we want to put in a, say, a Jedi organizational unit. And then we had the whole Senate thing. So we go in here and we say, okay, well, we need an organizational unit to put all the members of the Senate, all the user objects for, you know, all the Senate user objects, right? All those user accounts. Okay, there you go. All right, this is kind of nice, but what are we going to do about the computers, right? Are we just going to leave? We're not going to leave them all here. And then if we come into the computer, yeah, we can't create an organizational unit here. So we have no way to break that out. Okay, well, we can create, say, organizational unit for like Jedi computers, right? And this would kind of work. But, we've got Jedi computers, then we got Senate. So we kind of got to jump around and figure out where things are at. And it's kind of a mess. It's not so much now, but if you start adding more and more in there, right? So in the Republic, you've got senators, and you have, say, senator aides, and then you have security personnel, and you have like the intelligence arm of the Republic, say necessarily, so you have all these vast other departments within the Galactic Republic that are going to need to log into your domain and use network stuff. Well, if you start adding all of those in here, you can see where you wind up having to kind of jump around a little bit, and you got domain controllers in there, so you wind up in here and you're kind of like, well, surely there's a better way to do this. I have an idea on that. So if we come in here and we create a new organizational unit, and we name it Republic, right? Then we can just put everything underneath that. So we only have the one master to go to, and then we should have all the other stuff broken out. And you'll see what I'm talking about here in just a second. Problem here is the organization, the way it sorts this is by name. So if we did Republic, we're going to wind up right here between managed service accounts and Senate. And if you're in, and you're always going to be kind of in a hurry, right? You want to come in, you want to do something, you want to get out of it because you have plenty of other things on your plate to get done. So if we put an underscore in front, then that should put it right at the top of the list. Right. So if we come in here, of course, it puts it at the bottom when you first when it's first created, because but if we refresh the view, now it's at the top. Okay, great. Because now I can just open this right at the top. I have the thing, and now I can start getting into my other organizational units, the way I have things, broken up. So if we take Jedi computers, Senate, and then we select them all, drag them in. Active Directory is going to complain about moving stuff around here. Again, right now it's fine. We're not moving. We don't have a lot of objects within the OUs. And really, you can move a lot of stuff in mass. This is just basically saying, hey, it can mess up your group policies. Do you really want to do this? Have you not considered the other things that can be impacted? We already have. We're fine. We're going to go ahead and tell yes. So now, right, I'm going about business. I get calls and say, hey, we need to add some users, or we need to add some organizational units, or we need to do something in Active Directory. So I come in here, I go to Active Directory users and computers. All right, here we go. All right, I can just go straight into Republic and say, hey, I need to add a new Jedi. So I'll come in here, right click, go new user, and Yoda realized he doesn't have an account, right? All right, so we create Yoda. We're just gonna give him a login name of Yoda. We'll give him password. And we're not going to make him change it on first login, although good security practice would be to make the users change it, because you're going to usually give them a generic password to start with that everybody knows. In this case, I don't want to have to think about another one. We're not going to use any of the other options. Go ahead, click next. Oh, I can't type passwords. All right. Let's see if that works. There we go. Now it's just full name, login name. Okay, that's fine. So now I've kind of got in, done what I need to do. Now I can move on with my life, right? Move on to the next item in my list of things. If I preferred using the administrative center, I can do the same deal. I come in here. Actually need to refresh this though. All right, so I open it up. There's Republic. Okay, cool. Now I need to go into the Senate, right? I need to add a new senator. We have a new senator. Some new senator got elected or something. Whatever. Can right click over here, go to new, go to user, go into the actual last view pane, new user, or just new user in the taskbar. And this way we can add in a lot more information to start with than what we have when we add a new user through Active Directory users and computers. Right? We didn't get the option to add in a description. We didn't get the option to say, hey, we want a different display name. We want to add in the email address, all of these things, right? You can do that from here. And which one you use is really probably going to be more of a matter of preference for you. I lean more towards Active Directory users and computers because that was there from Server 2000. But whichever works for you, by all means, use that. So we're creating a new senator, right? And who's the big senator in all of episode 1? Palpatine, right? So we can go create him. Now we need a login. And the policy for usernames for us, Palpatine, is first dot last name. There's no last name, it's just first name. Right? All right, so we got that. Give it a password. We're not going to tick this. We're not going to make him change his password. So what we can do here is we can actually just go other password options. We don't have to select these, obviously. It's good. We're not going to worry about the encryption options. But here, we say, okay, well, we just want to go ahead and fill in the email address, right? So we're not going to worry about phone numbers because, hey, we don't use phone numbers in Star Wars. We just yell into a comm, hey, Bob. Job title, senator. Department is the Senate, which I can't spell. All right. Company. We'll call it Republic. Or no, actually, company for him, he's the senator of the planet Naboo. So we can use that as the company, right? All right. Again, we don't use phone numbers here, so we really don't need any of that. We're not going to worry about an address, direct reports. We have it. But the point being is the administrative center, we have more information we can enter in from the outset when we go to create a new user than when we go through Active Directory users and computers, right? We just basically get the option for first name, initials, last name, full name, login name, and then a password. Click OK. Come back over here. We have our user. So now if we go in and look at the properties, hey, look, our email address is already filled in. Under organization, we have the job title, we have the department, we have the company. We could put a manager in here, but he's a senator. I mean, who's his manager really? The people on his home planet, we don't need to put that in here. So now we have users. We have a couple of users in here. We have some organizational units. However, we have Jedi computers. And then we have separate user containers. And these would kind of require us to jump around a little bit. And we also need to think about group policies and how we're going to apply them later, right? So if we have, say, a group policy that applies to all of our users, well, right now what we have to do is we have to attach the group policy to this user folder, then this user folder. and every other department user folder. So we wind up within a lot of spots. If we go to make a change, or if we want to get rid of them, we have to go delete all of these instances. Really not the best way to go about that. So what if we come in and we create a new organizational unit and we call it computers, right? All right, so good. So far, so good. Then let's say we create another one and we call it groups because, the Senate, members of the Senate are going to be part of the Senate group because there should be a common share that they can all dump stuff into, because if they have a bill they're working on, they can submit that bill in a folder and then other senators can go look at that bill and read all that stuff, as opposed to having to copy it to multiple places or anything else. They just go to one spot and look it up. So we're going to have some groups. So let's do that. And then we need another one for, see, we got computers groups for users, right? For user accounts. So we do that, uncheck that. Okay, so now we can take the Jedi, we can take the Senate. Nope, not Shift, Control. So these are user OUs. We can drop these into the users organizational unit, and we can tell Microsoft to stop bugging us about it. We know what we're doing. We're fine. We're in control. It's good. We can take the Jedi computers. We can move it over to the computers OU, and then we can also rename organizational units, right? So if we come in here and we're like, okay, it's already under computers. We don't need to be told that it's Jedi computers. We already know. So we can just do this. Rename it to Jedi. So now we have the child underneath there. And I'm going to rename. Basically, I'm just going to not capitalize these. So you can F2 it, just like you would to rename a folder. Use those same group of commands. Okay. So, yeah, we're making some progress here. We got things kind of organized up. If we need to add a new user, we can come in here and say, okay. And we got this, and we got Senate. Okay. These are good. We may actually so as we start adding senators, we're just going to wind up with a whole list of them here, which is kind of nice, but they have different groups and they're from different planets, right? We have Naboo, right? Then you have the Chancellor's office. So it might make a little bit more sense to go in and define this down a little bit. So we could have organizational unit, and we could call it Chancellor's office. Chancellors. Yeah, I think that's, if not, yeah, we can fix it later, right? And then we know we need another OU for a planet for the center from Naboo, so we just Naboo that, right? Now we can come back in here and drag our senator in Naboo. So now we can, it's a little bit easier to kind of get where we need to in a hurry, right? Because again, as IT professionals, we're going to have a long list of stuff. So we don't want to spend a lot of time in here hunting bits down to add, remove, so on and so forth, make add, moves, changes. So we fill this out a little bit more. We come in here, organizational unit. Let's see. So we're going to have Senate computers, right? We also need stuff for the IT department. Because let's face it, as IT, we have special privileges, right? Our stuff needs to be a little different. We come in here, and we've got a little bit of repetition going on as far as like typing in. But once this is set, and usually you're going to inherit, so you've already got something. You may shuffle stuff around depending on whether or not you're allowed to, and kind of how things are organized and what all's going on. But so I'm kind of liking this. This is working. All right. So if we come into computers, then we say, okay, we got Jedi computers. We don't have any computers right at the moment, so there's nothing to worry about there. Groups. Let's go ahead and make our standard 3 groups that we're going to use. So we have our IT group. All right. We have our Jedi groups. And finally, Senate groups. Yeah. All right. That's looking pretty good. I like this. Again, it gives me a chance if, I need to do something. I come in here and just open up Active Directory users computers. All right. It even has the last item that I had selected, which is kind of nice. But I can go into, okay, cool. I can go into users. All right. It's a Senate user. Okay. Now I can find the planet. And now we've got things organized. We've got stuff going on. This is good. And that really is the domain in a nutshell. Right. So that's the very basic configuration for an Active Directory domain. Okay. This is good. We've talked about shares though. So probably ought to make some of those. But now that we're starting out in our domain, we only have the one server. We can come in to the C drive and we can make some new folders if we wanted to, right? We can say shares, then we can create some subfolders underneath here and do the whole thing. But it's normally not how you're going to see. What we can do is on the same server, because first off, adding shares on the C drive, I'm not a fan. Having them on your domain controller, still not a huge fan, but we can make allowances because we don't know what we're going to walk into in production in the real world, right? So let's go ahead and create another virtual hard disk. I'm going to leave it as VHDX, obviously, right? Dynamically expanding. Yes, we want that. And we're going to call this Republic DCO1 dot storage. Next, we're going to leave it at 127. No need to change that right now. Look over our options, make sure we didn't fat finger anything because I love to do that. Everything looks good. Go ahead and click finish. All right. So now we're going to attach that hard drive to this server. All right. So we'll come into the settings in Hyper-V for our virtual machine. We go to SCSI controller. Hey, we want to add a new hard drive. And then we're going to browse for it. There you go. And this is why when I'm creating a virtual hard drive, I'll do things like .os and .storage, and we'll give it the server name. So now I have both of them tied. It's easy for me to find the drive that I need, right? And again, we want to do things quickly and efficiently. So less searching around and, so on and so forth and getting clutter into the mix. the better off it is for us because we're less prone to make mistakes that way. And we can come in here, we can do things relatively quickly and move on to the next item in our list. To-do list for that day. All right, so now that we've attached it and we've saved that virtual hard drive, we don't see it in File Explorer. Well, we need to get into disk management. All right. Now on Windows 10, Windows 11, you can right click, come into manage, and it will take you to a whole different screen. Problem is in Microsoft Server, you do that and it just opens Server Manager. Ooh, okay. Server Manager as a server administrator for Microsoft is your friend. You're going to launch just about every tool this way because you've got it. You have the Swiss Army knife of all the stuff that you need right here, right? So if we go on tools, come down, we look. What do we got? We got computer management. Hey, sounds promising. What do we got going on here? Hey, disk management. There you go. All right. So we have the disk. It's offline. This is even on a physical machine. When you add new disks, like on your Windows 10 boxes or anything like that, if it's a brand new out of the box disk, it's never been formatted, you're going to plug it in, it's probably going to be awful. You're going to have to initialize it. You're going to have to bring it online. You're going to have to format it and break it up into partitions if you do that. All of these things, right? So we just come over here, right click, say, hey, we're online. Now we're not initialized. Great. Right click again, initialize disk. Now we're presented with the option to use the master boot record or the GUI partition ID table, or the GUI ID partition table. Anymore, it's going to be rare that you ever actually use the master boot record, and we'll go into more details on that again later down the road. For the most part, you're just going to leave it GPT because this allows for the larger disks, right? The newer disks now where you're into 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes, so on and so forth. So we're just going to leave that. There you go. All right. So unallocated, we need to format it. All right. Problem is when we format it, right, we right click on it, we go new simple volume, tell it next, tell it to use the max disk space because we're not going to slice this up into multiple partitions. We could, but we're not going to. But assign the following drive letter. And more than likely, you're going to see this when you inherit a domain, or you start a new position as a server administrator, you take over for somebody who's either retired or moved on, and you're going to see this a lot. Is they're going to go through and they'll add a disk, because when you spin up a physical disk or anything like that, you never format any additional drives. You spin up a C drive. You've already got usually the DVD drive on a server. So you're going to have kind of this thing. You're going to have C drive, which is your OS partition. You're going to have the D drive, which is the DVD or the optic drive, right? And then you're going to have, say, another disk that you've created that's now volume E. And this drives me nuts when I find it or when I come across it, because as you're going through later and you are trying to access, say, you want to access the administrative share, because here's the other thing. Every machine that you join to the domain, right, it will have an administrative share or a hidden share. So you can type in the computer name, and then you can type in the administrative share, which is the drive letter $, because it's hidden, right? There you go. So you're going to, and you may not, like, if it's a new domain, like you take over and, or inherit a new domain, or, you sign on a new client for a domain that you've never actually worked on before. You're coming in, you're kind of getting familiar with stuff, and you're like, hey, I've got a file server. I need to say, look at this, the share folders, right? I need to navigate something. So you'll go to the server, you'll type in D for the administrative share, you hit it, and then bam, can't access it. You're like, but wait, no, there's already a share on the server. So, well, then you have to come in here and you have to go, okay, drive E. All right, now you think this isn't a thing, but as you start building your own, you have, say, C drive. D drive is actual where you keep all of your shares. Then you have an optical drive like drive E, right? This kind of thing trips you up and it kind of breaks you out of your rhythm for a second. So what I do, first off, we're going to, yeah, I can remove it, but I'm not going to. So yeah, actually I am going to. So I want to do this the way that, I want to show you the way that I do it. I'm coming here and I'm going to remove this drive for a minute. And then we actually see that it's taken out. Back. We're going to add it back in. That's already formatted, so we don't have to go through all of the things necessarily, but we're going to go, okay, there you go. Yeah, see, so it's already got new volume E. This didn't work out quite the way that I had planned on it, which is fine. But if we delete the volume, there you go. So we delete the volume, we have no deal. We brought our disk online, we've initialized it. Now we're ready to say, create a new simple format, right? But we know that we have drive D. We don't want drive D to be the optical drive. We want it to be this partition. So we come to the optical drive, change the drive letter. Say, okay, you're now going to be E. Windows is going to holler at us, say, oh, well, it may not run. We don't care. Yes, it's fine. Okay, so now when we come in here and we do a new simple volume, I'm going to go next. Right? Oop, there you go. It's now assigned drive letter D. And I usually relabel them to say storage, as opposed to new volume, just something. Right? Now we can go through when we create it. So we get formatted here. Right? Okay. So now, C, D. So what I would recommend you get in the habit of doing is when you create new partitions and when you create new disks, or when you're adding them to servers, if there's an optical drive that you have there for some reason, whether it be a physical thing or in this case a virtual machine where we haven't removed that yet, go in, take the moment, assign the optical drive a different drive letter, and keep all of your actual disks and volumes, drive letters in order, right? So if we were to add another disk here, we'd come in here, we say, okay, this is now going to be F, and then and the new partition is going to be E. Usually anymore, I don't see where you go past D, but there may be instances depending on how everything gets sliced up or what you've inherited. The easiest thing to do here is once you've got Microsoft Server installed on a new VM, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of use for the actual optical drive. All right, so just come in, click the optical drive, remove it. All right, there you go. Nice and clean. Now of everything we add, the next driver letter available is E, F, G, so on and so forth. And we don't have the optical drive floating around here because we don't really need it most of the time. And if you do, you just add it in, attach whatever disk image you've got, do what you need to do, and then just delete it again, right? So the equivalent of having a USB DVD drive that you just plug in, do the thing, disconnect it, and go on. So now that we've got that, we can come in and we can create some subfolders or some new folders anyway. So let's see. We can do home directories. Oops, I don't think I spelled that right. Stories. Yeah, okay. We can add another one. Call it, say, public shares. And actually, that gives me a different idea. So if we come in here and we go private shares. So we have public private shares. Right? Then we move home directories under private shares because not everybody should be able to access those. And then say in public shares, we create a folder for Jedi users to share stuff. Senate. Oop, I misspelled that. Told you, I fat finger stuff all the time. Now we've got some folders and how we want to share these. Like we can share private shares, right? And then inherently everything underneath them we will see. So if we come into public shares, and before I do that, let's go ahead and create another virtual hard drive. Expanding is fine. And so did I download? Windows 11. Let's call it IT Management OS. We'll leave that 127 gig. Finish. So then we come back. So we'll create a new virtual machine. Call that IT Management Republic example org. Now the naming convention for your virtual machines is obviously going to vary by what your environment is. I like using the fully qualified domain name just because it's there. I know what it is. It's usually unique, right? You don't have to. But use what makes sense to you. Come back, default switch this. Okay. We already have the virtual hard drive created, so we're just going to use that. Yes. Change our settings. All right, so use the dynamic memory. We'll make sure that it has at least a gig. Maximum 16. 2 virtual processors, that's fine. Add our DVD drive because we're going to have to install the operating system, right? Browse that. So apply it. Now we come back into firmware and we're just going to move the DVD drive up to the top. Step through here, come into integration services, untick time synchronization. Now, if you're using VirtualBox, I haven't found that it has this by default. I think it's when you actually add in the integration tools that it does that. We don't want to use automatic checkpoints. We're not going to change the smart paging file. We are going to tell it not to start. We're going to tell it not to do anything when the physical computer starts because we don't want to spin these up automatically in the lab that we're using. And then, of course, come in here, tell it shut down the guest operating system. Click OK. Now come back, right click, connect. That'll be fine. Go ahead and start it. Oh, didn't catch it. There we go. I think we got it. Find out. Oh, there we go. We got the little spinny wheel of death. Install. And Windows 11 Pro. Because most of the machines that you buy. Oh. No. All right. Let's go ahead and turn this off for now. And file, settings, security. We're going to go ahead and check enable trusted platform. Click OK. Well, let's see if we can install Windows 11. And if it works, you will have installed Windows 11 on a physical machine that is not capable of running Windows 11. Let that sink in for a second. You're installing Windows 11 on a virtual machine running on a physical host that is not capable of running Windows 11. Is your mind blown? Need to at least skip the record a little bit? And there you go. So if you want to get familiar with Windows 11 and you have a Windows 10 computer, at least with Hyper-V, we can spin up a Windows 11 virtual machine on it. Confusing, I know. But we're doing it. There's actually I'm spinning up either a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 machine for a couple reasons. First, it gives us a machine to join to the domain that is not a server. Second, it allows me to show you the remote server administration tools, which is the preferred way to actually manage things like your Active Directory, your DHCP, your DNS. Because now you're not actually in the server, right? So where we would normally be directly on the server, and I've seen multiple strategies for people to try and figure out, so that they catch on that they're on a server, right? So they'll come in here and they may change the background to like all yellow or all blue, depending on what they've got. So they'll come in here and they'll They'll have the background changed to something other than the standard deal. They said they'll have it like maybe all blue. And so they look at it, they're like, oh, okay. But problem is, once you have enough windows open, like we did earlier, you've obscured kind of the back. So you may forget you're on a server. Right? Or if you're remote desktoped in to the server from your workstation and you forget and you come in to go do something and you wind up deleting, say, a share or some files. Well, this isn't what you want. That's not what you want at all. So to avoid those kind of mistakes, right, you should use the remote server administration tools. That way you can get into Active Directory. You can create users, you can create organizational units, you can do the things you need to do, but you don't have to connect to the server first to launch the management tool. And for old school administrators, this is usually one of the harder things for them to get used to is using those remote server management tools. I see clients all the time, they're RDP'd into a server and they're RDP'd into it all day, right? Because they've got DHCP up, they've got Active Directory up. And then, when I have to go in and do work on the client machine, all of a sudden I disconnect the remote session. And then they're like, oh, well, I got disconnected. So then they'll reconnect while I'm in the middle of something, disconnect me. And then you kind of get the war back and forth where people are trying to vie for control of the remote desktop session before they figure out, oh, well, every time I connect into it, something different is open. So maybe somebody else is working on something. So, and if it's in like your office or the IT department, you may just be like, hey, Frank, are you doing something on server? Blah, blah, blah. Frank be like, yeah, you keep disconnecting me. What's up with that? Oh, sorry. So using remote server admin tools also avoids that whole situation. Nobody's fighting for control of the remote desktop to do things. If Frank needs to do something in DHCP, you need to do something in Active Directory, you guys can use the remote tools, manage the bits, and without getting in each other's way. Do what you need to do, and then off you go. Everybody's happy. Life is good. You don't accidentally blow something up on a server, which especially, because you never blow something up on a server, say, at 8:30 on Monday morning. No, you do it at 4:45 on Friday afternoon. And you don't want to blow stuff up at 4:45 on a Friday afternoon. You don't want to give up your weekend, or at least part of your weekend, fixing something that you inadvertently broke. I don't. You might. I doubt you do. So yeah, good rule of thumb, just stay out of the servers unless you absolutely have to do something there. I will say the exception to that is when you're in looking at permissions for shares and for NTFS. You can do it without RDPing into the server, but it might be a little confusing to get your head around. But we'll deal with that when we're really getting into shares. Also, having the other workstation also lets me test some other things and confirm some things. Like we should not be able to ping ourselves. So we shouldn't be able to ping the server. Although we can't hear because we're actually pinging ourselves. But when we get this workstation up, this workstation should not be able to ping the domain controller right out of the gate. I'm pretty sure the firewall, the Windows firewall, is already set to not allow that. If we go back and look, the network and sharing center, we can see that we're on a domain network. So we've changed that. If we look at the Windows firewall, we now have domain networks, private networks, and guest public networks. I start checking for updates too. Just leave that in the background for now. Hmm. Don't you just love building machines live? I will say, at least on the Windows 10 host that I'm using for this, VirtualBox just runs dog slow. And usually, since you're already running, say, Microsoft Server, so you get a new nice shiny server box in, right? Physical box. Typically, what you're going to wind up doing is you're going to wind up installing Microsoft Server desktop experience on it, then adding the Hyper-V role on that server and spinning up your VMs, so you're managing them all through Hyper-V. So the fact that I'm using Hyper-V here actually would carry over, and you're familiar with some of the Hyper-V stuff that you would run into using a Microsoft server. The other main computer, the other hypervisor you're going to run into is VMware. And it really depends on what you're doing there and kind of what the environment's decided as to which one you're going to use. But Hyper-V is already free and part of the license that you paid for with Microsoft. Whereas VMware, you've got to pay all the licensing for it. You have to connect the vSphere, which is really kind of a pain. But again, it depends on if you need the features of VMware. You most like, well, I can't say you most likely won't. It really just depends on your environment. No network. What do you mean no network? What do we got going on here? Connected to the vault switch, so we have a card. All right. Well, for the moment, we're just going to go with I don't have internet. It's fine. Connect with limited or continue with limited setup. Again, that's fine. Enter a username, doesn't matter. Enter password. Confirm the password. Okay, security question. Duh. And duh. Obviously, in a production environment, you're probably gonna want to have legit answers for that, or your environment will have standard answers to those questions. I turn all of this off. Pretty sure there's a part here where the message comes up where it's like, we made it through that part of the setup. I'm a little concerned that, you didn't think you were going to make it through there when you're the guys that made the whole thing. Saying. I mean, Microsoft is the one doing the configuration of their operating system. You should not be going like, oh, well, we made it through that part of the config. Great, it didn't blow up. Wait, what? So I think. Yep. Please keep your. Okay, so while that's going on, right? Close that. So I mentioned earlier that Active Directory is based on the LDAP standard. Well, LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Which is based on the X.500 specification that came out in 1988, but it's now on version 3. And essentially the new version just extended out certain options and deals like that. But LDAP, so that specification is, for all of the characteristics of a directory service. So it's the standards and the models for structuring kind of what goes into it and everything else. And then other vendors will build on top of that for different attributes, different ways they store things. But LDAP, so you can use LDAP, but you don't need Microsoft Server for an LDAP implementation, right? Because Novell used it. You can use just LDAP servers in general on Linux. They behave different. Because of course, it's just like the different browsers back in the days when you had, Netscape, Firefox, Internet Explorer, a web page, certain like JavaScript implementations. So the way that certain JavaScript options were made, or maybe cascading style sheets, were implemented one way in Edge, a different way in Firefox. So when you were doing web coding, you had to account for the different browsers because you never knew which one somebody was going to open it in. Well, LDAP basically says, okay, here's the bare bones of the ways that you should implement your directory. Microsoft goes in and adds like their own attributes and some other things on the back end for the way that Microsoft wants to do it. Linux may have its own certain builds. There may be certain other LDAP implementations that run on Linux that have other attributes. So LDAP is just open source. Here's the bare bones recommendations for what we've got. And then Microsoft goes in and says, okay, well, we're going to add all this other stuff in here, or so we've got the basics, and then we're going to add a few other bells and whistles. There you go. Which is also when third parties, so when you have, like single sign-on services and stuff like that you subscribe to, and you're doing queries against Active Directory, you do it in the LDAP format, which is why you will see the OU equals, and also why that structure. So when you're putting together like the path here from Nabu, right, you'll have OU equals Nabu because you're at the bottom, and then you have to work your way back up through everything till you get to the domain level. So, OBU. So you're at Nabu, then the next step up is Senate, and then the next organizational unit up from that is users. Then the next organizational unit is, underscore republic. Now we're in the domain. So now we've worked our way from here to here to here to here. Now we're in the domain bit, and this is where your DC part comes in. And then, DC equals public, this example. So that's how you wind up structuring the query from, say, a third party LDAP, somebody that wants to do third party queries against like your Active Directory. You structure it in the LDAP deal because they're going to do an LDAP query. As opposed to, say, because Active Directory is just Microsoft's implementation of LDAP. So it should be NTDS util. Yeah, India util help. Local roles, metadata cleanup, different owner role tokens, snapshots. These are things we'll get more into when we talk about Active Directory more in depth. going forward. See LDAP policies, manage the LDAP configure LDAP partition. We'll do a deep dive into Active Directory. Just not right at the moment. We got to get the base stuff set up first, really. Let's quit. There we go. Put that there. And our workstation should be able to get with 2K on that, right? It might be a little bigger than what we want. So about that. That screen's a little bit bigger than what we can't quite get away with 2K there. But we're going to have to deal with it for the moment. Actually, no, we're not. So if we exit, then reconnect. There we go. Let's do 1080. Very much more manageable. So then we add our local user, enter our local user password. The one good thing about doing the limited setup where Windows 11 does not recognize that you have an internet connection is it doesn't bug you to use a Microsoft account at installation. So you can do a local user. You can still do it the other way. It's just it's a couple more hoops you have to jump through, really, which is annoying. All right, so now we can use command prompt, but Windows Terminal, I mean, we have PowerShell, we have command prompt, but Windows Terminal is kind of the all-in-one catch-all and it's becoming default. So I just get used to using that, honestly. Okay. So we wanted to see, and I know better. With Hyper-V, I'm pretty sure VirtualBox does it too. But when you start up a virtual machine, the OS opens. For some reason, Windows by default does not enable the numlock. So if you have the number pad over on your keyboard, you have to go back and turn numlock on before you can actually use all of the characters, which is a little annoying. But, oh, hey. Okay, so Server 2012, Windows Firewall has not, or yeah, they allow ping responses by default. So thankfully, we don't have to go change that. When we get to Server 2022, though, we have to punch holes in the Windows Firewall so that we can respond to ping requests and that we can actually access the shares, the SMB shares. But that's down the line. Okay, so we can, or I want to do this. So we have a couple ways to join to the domain. We've already established that we can talk to the domain controller, right? So if we do an IP config, actually I'm going to do an all here. So we've got the gateway, we've got the DHCP server, but you notice our DNS server here is pointing to the gateway, which is really, it's okay for internet connectivity, right? So we could, oh, nope, DNS didn't actually like that at all. But I bet if we go into the browser, I really miss the days when I could just fire up a piece of software and not have to play 20 questions. Don't sign in. Don't worry about any of that. Okay, yeah, we can't. So we've got an IP address and we can ping stuff in the little NAT deal there, but we can't actually go out. I'm going to go with no. Can't reach the IP address. So we have issues here. DNS probe finished with bad config. Okay, so Windows 11 by default is not wanting to talk to the internet. We also have the problem for the DNS server that right now, if we try to join the domain, it's not going to find a domain controller because the DNS server is not a domain controller. Right? We need to fix this to get it talking to the domain controller so that it uses DNS, so that first off, we can actually find a domain controller when we try to join a domain. And then we can actually use the DNS from that server from the domain controller to go out to the internet. And can right click here, go to network and internet settings. Yeah, see, no internet access, blah, 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 blah. Come in here. You can do private. IP address, DNS server assignment. So right here, we have automatic DNS assignment. We can tackle this two ways. We can do it through the GUI, right? We should also be able to do set DNS server something. It's DNS client. DNS client. Server address. However, I need an interface index. So if I do get net adapter first. Now we set DNS this index 6. And then server address. So here, I only want to talk to the domain controller. I do not want the workstation to go out and look at Google's DNS just yet. So we're only going to give it, I can get my brain wrapped around this 172.25 instead of 172.16 deal they got going on here. Where? Access the sim resource client was not available. Set. Okay, are you just unhappy about the fact that I put a... Nope. Interesting. Deal with that in just a minute. Go to manual, go to IPv4. Preferred DNS should be 172.25.192.2. We're not going to worry about alternate DNS. I bet that's because I didn't run this in. Well, let's kind of bugs me. Let's run it as administrator. See if we get the same error. If it does, I'll do some research and try and figure out exactly so I can figure out exactly what happened there, because it shouldn't have been all that unhappy about that. Client server. Gross. That's not how you spell interface, by the way. And iNet face. Interface. X6. Server address 172.25.192.2, right? Yeah, okay. I just needed to run it from an elevated command prompt. So now that we've got that, should be able to resolve. Yep. Ta-da! All fixed. Now, it's not super responsive. Really didn't like that at all. Interesting. And part of the reason that it's slow doing that is because it's failing. So like when we get here to the server and we say, hey, I need to know what IP address Microsoft.com is at. And then the domain controller says, oh, okay, well, I'm the DNS server. Do I have that in my cache? No. All right, well, I'll just go ask. But because its first forwarder is the gateway, that times out, and then it has to default to the second. So if we come back in here, go into properties, go to forwarders, edit, add 8.8.8, add 8.8.4.4, both of which are Google. Delete the gateway. There you go. DNS Google, Google, Google. So we got the forwarders there. All right, we're good. So if we come back in here, we should now be fine. We don't need to make a change there yet. We will, but we need another domain controller before we can do that. And there you go. Ta-da! All right, so now, what were we doing? Oh, yeah. We're adding it to the domain. So again, with like everything else, right? We have multiple ways of accomplishing the task that we want. We want to join it to the domain. We can do this through the GUI. I don't think manage is what I want there. As a matter of fact, it's not what I want at all. What I want is properties. Okay. So define specific. So if we go to rename this PC, right? Microsoft has now changed this to where it comes in here and says, oh, well, you just want to rename the machine. You know, like, yeah, no, I want the option to join to a domain. I can't do that anymore from here, which is kind of annoying. But if we go to advanced system settings, now we can go to computer name, and we're back to the window that used to open before Microsoft decided, no, we're just going to make it simple. So, you know, we can come in here, we go change, and we can, you know, do admin, although Let's see, underscore. Underscores we don't want in device names because DNS can get kind of unhappy about that. And then domain is republic example.org. Okay, now technically in the domain we can use the net BIOS, right? So we could just do republic and we should be okay. But I would strongly encourage you and recommend that you always put the fully qualified domain name in here, just to make sure that everything plays nice. Again, it should be fine with just the NetBIOS name, but just get in the habit of pulling the fully qualified domain name in there. And you can never go wrong. The other thing that we need to consider when joining devices to the domain, all right, is by default, any device that we join to the domain is going to go into the computer's container. Now you can move it later and it's fine. But the thing you have to watch out for, especially in an existing domain, is the group policies. So if we look at the group policies, we obviously have not a whole lot right at the moment, right? So if we look, we really only have the default domain policy, and then we have the default domain controllers policy. And actually, another thing that you should get in the habit of doing whenever you run into and whenever you start managing an Active Directory domain that you know, an existing one that you inherit, or when you build one, is come into group policy management, go to the domain controllers organizational unit, right click on it, and then block inheritance. The reason you want to do this is because if you have any group policies that are at the domain level, like the default domain policy, right? These are going to apply to everything below them, including domain controllers. So if you have a domain group policy that does something like installs a piece of software, because it's at the root of the domain, it pushes it to everything. So you come along, you add a new domain controller, and now it's, or you know, it's, let me back up here. So you say you have a piece of software you want to push out, right? You want to push it out to every workstation in the domain. So you're just like, oh, well, that's cool. I'll just make the group policy, and I'll just put it on the domain, you know, I'll just put it at the domain level, and then it'll apply to all the machines because it's just a computer setting, right? And that's what I want. Okay, fine. Problem is if you don't block inheritance here, you've now installed that piece of software on your domain controllers. And there's no real reason to do that most of the time. Now, like antivirus software, yeah, you could make the argument that, well, yeah, I want to, and you do want it on the domain controllers, right? But you're not dumping mass servers necessarily. So you can install it at the time you build the server and you're fine. Or you can put a separate policy in here to go ahead and install it there as opposed to just pushing it out. But you want to block inheritance here because you don't want to roll out things necessarily to domain controllers. You don't need unnecessary software on. That's what I'm getting at. So we'll join this and then we'll to the domain and we'll call it a night. So you can, we can do this here and it's fine. We can just click OK. Then it says, oh, hey, you've got to give me credentials. So then we've got the administrator. Now, another habit you should get into is when you're doing this is at least put in the NetBIOS name. Even though by default, that's what it's going to check against. But just be 100% sure. Just type it in. At least the NetBIOS name. Wait. There you go. Okay, so, yep, welcome. We're joined. Awesome. Of course, we got to restart, which is fine. But if we come back and look in the computer's container and we refresh this, we now have the computer. We can drag this somewhere else, and I'm going to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and restart. And then, yeah, in the next session, we'll go ahead and we'll move this into the computers. So we'll move it here. And then I'll also show you how to join it with PowerShell, and you can actually just drop it straight in here, which is another nifty tool to avoid accidentally tripping up on other group policies. So, yeah. Well, I appreciate you hanging out. And we'll shoot either for tomorrow or Sunday, sometime this weekend. But until then, have a fantastic night. I'll talk to you later.